this video, we're going to talk about Clause 2. Clause 2 talks about the normative references. And what are normative references? Normative references are documents of external origin, meaning that they are created by other entities, not your organization, that are relevant to the management system. Okay? And if we were to see directly what the standard actually says about this, for example, here, the standard is saying that this document, ISO 27000, is being referenced within this document, meaning that the vocabulary, for example, relating to ISO 27001 is being described in this other standard, okay? In this other document, rather. So how I like to approach meeting the requirements, which actually there aren't any requirements in Clause 2, as I explained earlier, and this was defined in Clause 1, the requirements of the standard are set out in Clauses 4 till 10. But to meet the requirements of this, to meet the overall requirements of the standard, what I like to do in Clause 2 of the manual is to define a list of regulations that apply to the company. Okay? So here we can have maybe guidelines, maybe we can have specification documents that are issued by regulators where we work, etc. Okay? So here we're going to, as I mentioned, list all the documents of external origin. For example, GDPR. GDPR is one of the regulations that we have to consider, and there are other requirements depending on where your company is operating. As you can understand, this course is not about GDPR or about any other legal requirement when it comes to information security, because that can change depending on the industry where you operate. What we're talking about here is to make a list of requirements that applies to your organization, and how that is done in practice is that, and here I'm referring once again to Miss Frog, basically we're going to have a list of regulations that applies, and for each regulation we have to define what is the name of the regulation. It would be ideal to add a link or the actual document with the requirements to your management system, so you'll have access to these requirements. I like to have a description of what this document is stating and how is it relevant to our organization. And then I like to define what are we doing to meet the requirements of this particular regulation. We don't need to go overboard in this explanation, just a brief explanation and description. Then we're going to define if we are already meeting the requirements of the standard, and something that is very relevant is to define when are we going to check if there are any updates for this regulation, to make sure that we are always on top of our requirements when it comes to the meeting the requirements of various regulations or normative references that apply to your organization. Okay, so here we're seeing some legal requirements might be product specific, any certifications or training that your employees need to have, any country specific regulations or regulations relating to how you're going to work with suppliers, and any other regulations that you deem fit and relevant to your information security management system. Okay, so the way to meet the requirements of this clause is to define the legal requirements that are relevant to your organization. Okay, once again, these might be legislations, regulations, any licenses and permits that you need. It might be any agreements that you have with interested parties, non-regulatory guidelines, standards or code of practices that might be relevant to your organization, and other such documents that might impact the way that you're going to run your information security management system. Thank you so much.